Good morning, everybody. This is John Selleck, and thank you for being with us today. Unfortunately, too many of us have heard multiple stories about the sexual assaults committed by former University of Michigan doctor Robert Anderson. While a lot of the stories that we've heard about seem to all involve athletes, as he was the lead doctor for the athletic department, what a lot of people are less aware of is that prior to that, he was the head of what was then called the University Health Service. And that put him in a much different circle and a wider circle of targets for his predatory action. And clearly, looking back from people who have come forward in the 1970s, one of his target universes were young gay men who were on campus. Two of those are with us today, Keith Moree and Robert Stone. We'll be hearing from each of them in just a few minutes. They'll each give a set of prepared remarks and tell their stories and talk about why they're frustrated that we haven't come to any kind of, to their satisfaction, resolution, transparency, accountability in this situation. And then we'll open everything for Q&A, and we'll take questions directed for Keith and Robert. Once we're done today, we will be shooting out a copy of this video link as quickly as we can. So do your Q&A for sure while you're here, but you may have an opportunity to use the video before your deadlines today as well. And then certainly if there are any follow-up questions for Robert or Keith afterward, just be sure to email me or Jeff Pfeiffer, who may have emailed you earlier today, and we'll do our best to connect you as soon as we can. So first, be aware that Keith Moree was a student at U of M in the 1970s. He was sexually assaulted by Dr. Robert Anderson under the guise of medical care. He went for medical care and treatment. He reported his incident to university officials at that time, and I'll let him talk about that. He did so with the help of legendary gay advocate Jim Choi, who just recently passed. And at that time, Keith was left with the impression that Dr. Anderson would be shifted away from the ability to do harm to any other students. And so much to his dismay, he found out later that the university simply seemed to have shuffled Dr. Anderson from the University Health Service over to the athletic department, where he had a whole new set of targets for him to abuse. Then we'll hear from Robert Stone. Robert played a key role in this controversy as well, this scandal, because he stepped forward and wrote a letter to U of M just a few years ago. And that letter was essentially what helped break into the open the fact that so many complaints were coming and that the university had essentially secretly begun an investigation internally about Dr. Anderson, but had not told anybody yet. So both have played key parts in this time frame, unfortunately, in their lives, but they're here to talk about it today. So with that, I want to welcome Keith Moree. Keith, go ahead, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Keith Moree, University of Michigan class of 1981, and current resident of Portland, Oregon. Thank you all for being here today and for your interest in our story. I'm a proud graduate of the University of Michigan and also one of hundreds of people who were sexually abused by Dr. Robert Anderson, in my case, while he was medical director of the University of Michigan's University Health Services in 1980. I was not abused just because I was a student seeking medical care, though I was just that. I likely was abused because I'd just come out to Dr. Anderson as a gay man, given the nature of the visit. Robert Anderson was a chronic serial sexual predator who exploited any power differential he could find. Many of Anderson's earliest victims at the University of Michigan were gay men at a time when being outed could have grave consequences, which I should add can still be the case today. I want to acknowledge my deep appreciation for Robert Stone for bringing this story back out into the light after so many years. I also want to acknowledge Jim Choi, a dear friend and mentor who, in his role as gay male advocate at the University of Michigan, walked with me through the difficult experience of filing a high-level complaint against a practicing physician. Jim Choi died on New Year's Day. May his memory be a joy and an inspiration to us all. Jim Choi spoke truth to power. I'm here today to demand that the University of Michigan make good on a promise that it made to me in 1981, when I shook hands with Thomas Easthope, then the assistant vice president for student services, which included university health services. Mr. Easthope assured me that Robert Anderson would be removed from his medical duties with patients and that he would not be able to abuse students any longer. I repeat, Thomas Easthope and I shook hands on this agreement with Jim Toy as witness. Mr. Easthope thanked me for coming forward and said that it had taken a lot of courage to speak up. Of course, we now know how this played out. Robert Anderson was never removed from his medical oversight of students, and in fact, was shuffled to a position with even more power and control over students. No sexual abuse is ever warranted, obviously. I can say in my heart of hearts, after that agreement with Mr. Easthope, all of the sexual abuse that Robert Anderson committed was especially unnecessary, preventable, tragic, and did not have to happen. So, why does it still matter now to dig all this up after all this time? Some people would argue that these kinds of things can't happen in today's society. The world has changed. I would respond that the University of Michigan, with such a long history of covering up for Dr. Anderson's crimes, and let's remember, what we're talking about here are crimes that university officials knew about and never reported to the police, to the state medical board, or to anyone else in a position to investigate and potentially prosecute. That same university has consistently refused to take full responsibility for what occurred. In fact, the Wilmer Hale report that some of you would be familiar with said that dozens of University of Michigan employees were alerted through the decades to the actions of Robert Anderson. So that same university has consistently diminished the gravity of the harm that was done to its students, and the university has long shown more concern and care for its brand than for the well-being of its students. The University of Michigan has clearly demonstrated that it wants to do the minimum possible so that it can get out of the mess that it's made, not to do the right thing. With a new president in place, the university has a fresh opportunity to make restitution to those it has harmed, to replace a culture of hypocrisy at the highest levels with one of centering student well-being, and to promote healing in the university community. Thank you.
And my name is Robert Stone. I received my BA from the University of Michigan in 1972 and my master's degree in 1973. I'm coming to you today from Palm Springs in my guest bedroom. In 1971, at the end of my junior year, I was just coming out as a gay man, and I was told that I might have been exposed to a sexually transmitted disease and I should see a physician. And I had a very small number of gay friends in Ann Arbor. And so I called one of them and I said, oh, what do I do? This was a new experience for me. And he said, oh, just call Dr. Anderson. And he gave me Dr. Anderson's number and he said, and tell them I sent you. And so I thought it was kind of strange because I knew Dr. Anderson was the head of the University Student Health Service. I thought, why would this schmo who would give me his number have any clout with Dr. Anderson? So I took the number, I called, I got an appointment the next day. I went there and I was sexually assaulted in the course of that examination. And I was the first person to come forward in a public forum on February 19th of 2020 on the cover of the Detroit News. I told in great detail what happened to me in that exam room. And if you want me to discuss that in great detail, I will be glad to do that. I would rather not. Suffice it to say, Dr. Anderson, I want to make sure that everyone understands that even though Dr. Anderson spent a decade sexually molesting the gay men of Ann Arbor, it was not enjoyable for any of us because Dr. Anderson was a troll. He was just a disgusting human being. And what he put us through was so traumatizing. I remembered when I walked out of that exam room, I was so disgusted and I was so angry. And I'm still angry. 50 years later, I'm still carrying this anger. And the friend who sent me, I got back to him and I was like, oh my God, this is what just happened to me. Why didn't you tell me? Did this happen to you? Is this what happens to everyone, every gay man that goes to see Dr. Anderson? And he wouldn't speak. He wouldn't answer any questions. He wouldn't say anything. And that's when I knew this is what happens to everyone who goes to see, every gay man who goes to see Dr. Anderson for an examination. So I stuffed it down. I did what so many people have done for so many years. And then in 1993, I was still really concerned about it and wanted to get to the bottom of my own feelings. And I actually requested my medical records, which I was able to obtain. And I was the only person who came in that initial group of people who notified the university. I came in with my medical records. I could show every single time I saw Dr. Anderson. A couple of things I want to talk about because I've thought about them a lot in the last 2 years. I haven't spoken publicly about this since the press conference in March of 2020. But I thought about what is it that allowed this to happen for over 30 years. And the two things that I think that are most relevant in terms of causative reasons are tenure and toxic masculinity. Because academia at the University of Michigan exists as a sheltered workshop for special needs savants. And the glue that holds this cesspool together is tenure. And it bears much of the blame for the university's failure to act against Dr. Anderson. Because when malfeasance is detected among tenured staff, no one will speak up or call it out because no one wants to punch a hole in the boat that's keeping them all afloat. And it's interesting that now that President Mark Schlissel has been fired for cause, it has not terminated his tenure status. That is going to have to be a whole separate hearing, which is frankly outrageous. But tenured people, and I can promise you, whoever it is that turned in Mark Schlissel is not a tenured staff member. It's going to be some administrative assistant or a secretary, someone who is not part of the little mafia called tenure at the University of Michigan. The fact is, the university is not committed to change. Last year, they floated a proposal to change the rules for tenure that suggested that maybe when a tenured staff member was convicted of a felony, they should convene a committee to determine whether tenure should be continued. Conceptually, that's so outrageous to me. If they said, well, any tenured employee who's convicted or who pleads guilty to any sexual misconduct misdemeanor will have tenure immediately revoked, that's meaningful change, but we're not getting that from the university. What we're getting from the university is a commitment to process, and this translates as foot dragging. It's all about using pencil, paper, paragraphs, and pedantry to delay these cases out, hoping that many of us will die before the case settles, because that will save the university money. And some of us have died already. The second thing I want to talk about is toxic masculinity, because what's been happening is people who were victims of Dr. Anderson, many of them are afraid to speak at all. They don't want to come forward because they're traumatized, because they feel some guilt, which is completely inappropriate. They had nothing to do with being sexually molested. They just showed up in an exam room. the coaches turned a deaf ear to it. And their definition of masculinity is that if you're sexually assaulted, you just stuff it down and you keep on. You go back to the playing field, you stand on the scrimmage line, and you just man up. But in cases of sexual assault, you man up by speaking up. And I would encourage all of those people who feel like they can't speak about this to do so. If you can't speak about it personally with the people you love, speak about it with a therapist, because you're not helping any of us or yourself by continuing to remain silent. The last thing I want to speak about is transparency. When I first came forward with my story in February of 2020, the university was offered the option of having the Attorney General of the state of Michigan conduct an investigation. But Dana Nessel, the Attorney General, said, I will consider this if the university commits to full transparency. But the university did not do that. They refused to commit to full transparency. Instead, they lawyered up. And so witnesses, people that we had a good reason to believe knew exactly what was going on, they clammed up. Everybody lawyered up. They all had lawyers present when our counsel went to interview them. The university continued to offer platitudes, but no substantive change. Wilmer Hale, I think Keith mentioned, I can't remember how many people Wilmer Hale identified as having known about it. A dozen employees who knew.
No, dozens.
Dozens who knew but did nothing. So a few of them are actually still employed by the university, but no action has been taken against them for their silence. So the other thing that the failure to provide transparency means is that you don't know some of the things that I know, and I have to tell you a few of them before I turn this over to questions. Because I was first, I opened Pandora's box. And that means that people found me. People called me and told me about their sexual assault, told me things that they had never told another human being. And I felt I had to listen. What I learned is that Dr. Anderson became more and more empowered and more felt he was untouchable as the years went on. Mm-hmm. He began in March of 2020 at the press conference, I said that what happened in Ann Arbor is a horror story. And it is a horror story if you know the details, but because the university is withholding all of the details of what went on in those exam rooms, you don't know that Dr. Anderson in 2000 was actually taking the electrodes that chiropractors often use for muscular stimulation. If you have a muscle spasm in your back or your shoulder, they will attach these electrodes and they will raise or lower the amount of electrical stimulation to help relieve the muscle spasm. He was using those electrodes and attaching them to his patient's penis and also attaching them to his own penis and simultaneously stimulating them both to erection and then to orgasm. This is a Dr. Frankenstein. And these are the kinds of things that went on that you don't know about because the university would not commit to transparency, and the victims are so shamed and so damaged that they can't talk about them. I'm not pleased to be bringing you these stories, but you need to know, and I would encourage more people to speak up. So that's all I have to say formally. I'll turn it over now to questions.
Thank you very much, Robert, and thank you, Keith, as well. Right now, to be able to ask questions, you can raise your hand with the button at the bottom of the screen. If anybody has a question right now, they can raise their hand and I will put you into the questions. The first question that we'll have is from Barbara Bellinger with MERS News. It's a Lansing Capital News service that covers politics and government. Barbara, please go ahead. And please identify if you have a specific person you'd like to direct the question to.
Hello. either Mr. Stone or Mr. Moree can address this, but I'm wondering what you hope will come next, and potentially as a result of the presidential change.
Yeah, well, if you don't mind, Keith, since I've
Go
thought
ahead.
about this, I think that for the university to reach back and rehire a 78-year-old fossil from the last decade who sat in that chair for all of those years and instituted none of the changes that are necessary at the University of Michigan, I would say I am not optimistic, and that's an understatement.
I would address that a little bit differently. And what I would say is that this is an opportunity for the university to take a really hard, cold look at how they've been dealing with the Dr. Anderson situation and all of the people that were victimized by Dr. Anderson. I want to repeat what Robert was saying, that so many people have come forward and told their stories, but many people have not. I know of people who still have not spoken out because of shame, embarrassment, concerns about their relationships with the University of Michigan, all kinds of different things. So I think this is an opportunity for the university to really do the right thing. Wilmer Hale was very, very specific in developing a list of many things that the university could do to both address its toxic culture, especially where it comes to anything that could shed a potentially bad light on the university. There's this kind of image of the U of M, which it's a great school, we know that. And at the same time, it's a human institution. It messes up sometimes. And I want the university to take this opportunity to really look at this situation and to move forward in ways that have been very clearly delineated.
Thank you, Keith and Robert. Next up, we have a few questions in the queue. The next one in the queue is from Corey Williams. He's with the Associated Press in Detroit. Corey, please go ahead with your question.
Quick question for both guys there. With Ms. Coleman, Dr. Coleman being reinstalled at least on an interim basis as U of M president, how much do you guys think or know that she was aware of the allegations against Anderson while she was president in her previous time?
Well, I don't think she was aware because Dr. Anderson retired in 2003, and I believe his retirement preceded her becoming president of the university.
Well, then that's she at that time though. The allegations are that the sexual abuse occurred back in the 70s and 80s and 90s. As president, even before his retirement, is that something that she should have been aware of if others at the university were aware of it?
It's tenure. You think somebody is going to raise their hand and say, oh, by the way, did you know about this happening all before you arrived? That's not going to happen because it's a little mafia at the university. I really can't make that point more strongly. They don't talk.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Corey. Next question up is from WDIV, television station in Detroit, Michigan. Please go ahead.
Hi, gentlemen. It's Priya Mann from Local 4. First, I'd like to thank you both for taking the time to talk to us. I can't imagine how difficult this is. In light of President Schlissel being fired, can you talk about your thoughts about what this speaks to the culture at U of M? This is somebody who said that he would be a proponent of reforms when it came to sexual and gender-based misconduct, and now has been fired for having allegedly an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate. Can you talk at all about what your thoughts are as this story is developing?
Yeah, I'd like to address that if I could. I think that the world of academia has a lot of special challenges when it comes to looking at these kinds of issues about inappropriate sexual relationships and things like that. And I don't know all the details. I've read the press accounts of former President Schlissel and his conduct. I think what happens in the university environment is that there's kind of like this ivory tower, even at the individual level. And people tend to be turned into heroes. And the University of Michigan has different hero tracks. So you can do the academic thing. So you can be one of the people that's a Michigan man that's kind of driving forward the sports, or you can be an academic who's driving forward Michigan's reputation in the world of academia. But the effect is the same of idolization, idealization. And I think that's part of the culture that we're asking the university to look at and to work with differently, is how to work with situations where you're going to have these dynamics, but working with them and training people to work with them in ways that are not so damaging. We go to the extreme example of a Dr. Anderson, which is very, very different than what ex-President Schlissel was being accused of. But they're sort of along the same continuum of what happens when people are made untouchable. And that's part of the culture that has to change.
Although I have to say, I did get a little bit of amusement from his 118 pages of emails, which I read page by page. And each one of his emails to his lover were closed with Mark Schlissel, MD, PhD, President, University of Michigan. I thought that was a really charming sort of way of introducing yourself to your lover at the end of every note. Beyond that, I specifically remember last summer, Schlissel came forward and was like introducing this new change in the rules at the University of Michigan that staff was not to ever have any sexual relationships with subordinates. And this was like a real substantial change, and there would be no variations and there would be no exceptions to this rule. And he was so affirmative and so sure that this was the way it was going to be from now on, while he was having an affair with a subordinate. So my overall reaction to the entire episode can be encapsulated in 3 words: what a pig.
Do I have the opportunity for a follow-up?
Yeah, go ahead, Priya.
Thank you both for talking on this. Do you think it speaks to the culture? I know that you mentioned that, this is what happens when people are quote unquote untouchable, but as you both have sort of hit upon, this is somebody who was, at the top of the university, who was representing, this idea of change, that they were going to tackle this head on in real tangible ways, and now has been fired. Just what are your thoughts on when you were looking at sort of the big picture, what he represented, what he was saying, and now ultimately what's happened when you talk about the culture at U of M?
It's the perfect example of the real transparency at the University of Michigan. It's transparently clear to anyone who wants to pay attention that there's no commitment to change, because the president of the university couldn't stop himself from having his own affair that was against their written rules. I mean, it is a culture of duplicity and a dual standard. One thing applies to everybody else, and those who are tenured have another set of rules, regardless of what the written procedures may be. Yeah, what can I say?
All right, thank you. Corey from the Associated Press, your hand is still up. Did you have another question? Okay, I think he's all set.
I'm sorry, no more questions. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Corey. I don't want to leave you out. Any other questions right now from the media? All you have to do is push that raise hand button down at the bottom. I'll give you another second here for that.
Can I ask one more, John?
Go right ahead.
And gentlemen, I think you already hit on this to a degree, but now we have an interim president. The search is on for another president. I think that it's fair to say that the image of U of M has been significantly tarnished with what seems to be one after the other. If you look at the provost, you look at the survivors of Dr. Anderson, you look at what's happening now with Dr. Schlissel. If you're looking forward, what are your hopes as a search for a new president? I mean, the decision to fire Dr. Schlichtel happened behind closed doors. So, what is your hope as this search now for a new president becomes underway?
Personally, my hope would be, number one, someone younger, and number two, a member of the LGBTQ community, because generally speaking, I don't think we do this kind of stuff, and we certainly don't sit still for it. I don't.
Keith, do you have anything?
Yeah. Again, I think that the job of a university president, especially of a major university with international standing, that's a tough job. There's many, many, many things that have to come into account. I think, though, that at this point in time, the university needs to do a hard reset on this whole culture, and it needs to be from the top down and also from the bottom up. The next president of the University of Michigan, it's a new world that we live in terms of being able to dictate things to people. And so this president needs to be able to engage with all members of the university community to have dialogue. I think in some ways there needs to be a truth and reconciliation committee to really, first of all, look at what's been going on there. Let's get this out in the open, really know what we're dealing with, take the hard knocks, and then move forward together. And that's going to be a president with a lot of skill in terms of working with people and listening. And that is a hard thing to do. I think there's a lot of lip service that's given to listening, but actually listening and then working with people is not so easy. That's what I would be looking for.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Next up, we have a question from Sarah Lear. She's at WKAR, that's the public radio station at Michigan State University in East Lansing. Go ahead, Sarah.
Hi, thank you both for speaking today. You've talked about your thoughts on the previous president and the interim president, but I'm wondering, do you have confidence in the leadership of the Board of Regents? How do you think they've handled the scandal related to Schlichtel, and are you confident in their ability to pick a new president?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Keith. Go ahead, jump right in.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Well, what I would say is that generally past performance is a good predictor of future performance, but I don't know. I have to have confidence that that the regents are going to also be looking at their role in all of this and looking at how they need to be doing things differently in the future. And again, this is a pretty critical point in the history of the University of Michigan. A lot of people need to be asking themselves a lot of hard questions and be willing to go where those answers lead them. And so I don't know. I tend to be an optimist and I want things to be better in the future. And I think that that's possible, but I also know that it's not easy.
Without naming names, I think there are some people on the Board of Regents who should not be there, who are there simply because of financial reasons. And that's obviously one of the primary reasons someone gets appointed to the Board of Regents. I don't think some of those people have the best interests of the students, or certainly the best interests of the victims at heart, or they would be proceeding differently, or they would have proceeded differently over the last 2 years. I haven't seen a change of course from them. I don't know how much embarrassment the university can take before they decide to make a true change of course. But, you know, over time, if this continues, a degree from the University of Michigan is just going to be an embarrassment. And it's going to take a real change in attitude among the Board of Regents to turn this around. And I haven't seen that change yet.
All right, thank you. Next, we have a question from Hearns Laguerre. I apologize if I mispronounced that, with the Detroit News. Please go ahead.
Hey, this is Hearns from the Detroit News. Thank you both for sharing your stories. I just wanted to know if you guys both alluded to this, but could you speak to the healing and the process that you guys had to take um, to I guess to heal from this trauma? You know what I mean? And maybe ways in which the university could help the survivors in dealing with this.
I'd like to speak to that. I think one thing that's been very, very helpful is that the university did offer counseling to folks that felt like they needed support and needed treatment with trauma that happened so long ago. But can still be very present and very alive today. And so I am grateful for that. And I think also it was a little bit of a bandage that was put on things just to kind of make it look like things were being dealt with. I think that the university did something really, really crappy to its students who it allowed to go into medical offices in its university health system, in its athletic training rooms, and be sexually assaulted by a known sexual predator. This was done, I don't know if it was done intentionally, but it certainly was done without any concern for those people. And the university did that, and it didn't go away just because a couple of decades have gone by. Dr. Anderson retired with full honors from the University of Michigan. And I would like to see people that dedicated their athletic skill, that dedicated their academic skill, that dedicated their passion to the University of Michigan and were horribly treated by the university. I would like to see these people publicly acknowledged. That would be very helpful for me. I don't know if it would be helpful for other folks who encountered Dr. Anderson during his glory days at the university, but I think it would be a good start. And then also, I'll let Robert speak to that. So that would be one thing that I think would be helpful, a full, open acknowledgement of what happened and an honoring of the people who the university harmed.
I have to say that one of the men who reached out to me right after my story broke in the Detroit News was assaulted by Dr. Anderson 4 times. And they were really horrible assaults. And at the time, he was he was raised in a very religious family, and he had never had sex with anyone. And so that was his introduction to sex, was Dr. Anderson's abuse. He was completely traumatized by it. His life post-Michigan, he'd never had a successful adult relationship with anyone, and anybody who got close to him realized how damaged he was, and they immediately withdrew. He never successfully maintained a job or pursued a career because he was just too messed up. About 8 months after I got the first call, he did call me back to let me know that he did see a therapist that the university had paid for, and that he had been working through his stuff. He finally told his parents what happened to him, because he'd never told them, and that he was really kind of on the road to recovery, and he felt a lot better about where he was and who he was. So that's one of the ways you get through it. You seek out help. The other thing I have to say, being in denial never helps. I mean, I'm an old man, I'll be 72 this summer. At some point in life, you have to own your life. You have to own all of it, the good, the bad, the indifferent. It's your journey. And my experience with Dr. Anderson is part of my journey. And I know it is. I'm still angry about it, but to a certain extent, it is what it is. I can't keep working this, anger that I have, it's still there. And when I feel it, I have to express it. I have to let it out. I have to know that I didn't bring it on myself. It had nothing to do with me. I share no guilt in this. It's an ongoing process. When it comes up, I have to work through it, and then I let it go and I move on. I didn't sleep well last night. I probably won't sleep well tonight, because talking about this is not fun. I don't enjoy it. But you just work through it. I don't know. I know that it may sound simple, but that's what it is.
Okay, well, with that, I think we'll close the Q&A for now. We want to thank Keith Moree and Robert Stone for being here today, for sharing your stories, for speaking up for yourselves and on behalf of many others who are unable to speak on their own at this time. For members of the media on board here, we are going to turn around a video and get it online for you to access as soon as we can. Additionally, if you have later on further questions or you want to speak to Robert or Keith directly, we'll work with you to do that. Just send me an email. You can go to my website, harborstrategic.com, if you don't have my email address. But otherwise, we'll close with that. And thank you, everybody, very much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks.